The Chancellery's secure conference room in Berlin hummed with the low whir of air conditioning. Dim overhead lights cast long shadows across the polished oak table, where papers lay scattered like fallen leaves. Olaf Scholz sat at one end, his fingers steepled, eyes fixed on the screen, dominating the far wall. Volodymyr Zelensky appeared there, his face sharp under the Kyiv studio's harsh fluorescence. He leaned forward, tie loosened, the faint echo of distant traffic filtering through his feed. "Chancellor, your peace plan arrives like a gift-wrapped surrender. 20 billion euros in reconstruction aid tied to territorial concessions. Ukraine cedes 15% of its east, and Germany gets to play mediator with Russia?" Scholz adjusted his glasses, the lenses catching a glint. He exhaled slowly. "President Zelensky, it's pragmatic. The war has drained Europe's reserves. Germany alone has committed 8.5 billion in military support since 2022. This plan halts the bleeding, phased withdrawals, neutral zones, and joint oversight. Without it, escalation risks pulling in more allies, costing us all triple that in the next year." Zelensky's jaw tightened. He tapped a folder on his desk, pages rustling audibly. "Pragmatic? Your document hints at off-books channels, diverted funds from the EU's 50 billion euro Ukraine facility funneled to back-channel talks with Moscow. Is that the hidden scheme? Germany whispering peace, while arming us with one hand and restraining with the other?" The room in Berlin fell quieter, save for the soft click of Scholz's pen against the table. His advisor, a wiry man in the corner, shifted uneasily, glancing at a tablet. Scholz leaned in. "Those are unverified rumors. Our demands are clear: mutual de-escalation, accept the framework or face fractured support. NATO's unity phrase, polls show 62% of Germans want talks now, not endless aid." Zelensky laughed, short and bitter. "Unity? You say de-escalation? I see betrayal. If Ukraine bends, Russia takes the Donbass outright. 7,000 square kilometers lost, plus the lives already tallied at 500,000 combined casualties. Your plan doesn't mention the 20% GDP hit our economy has taken. It's not peace, it's partition." Scholz's voice dropped, steady as stone. "Partition saves what's left. Reject it and you'll isolate Kyiv. Our intelligence warns of Russian advances on Kharkiv within months, another 10,000 troops mobilizing. Think of the stakes." The screen flickered slightly as Zelensky paused, his eyes narrowing. He straightened, voice rising. "Stakes? You've ignored our red lines from the start. This isn't negotiation, it's dictation. Ukraine won't trade sovereignty for your domestic polls." In Berlin, Scholz's advisor whispered urgently, sliding a note across the table. "Leak risk, French embassy sniffing." Scholz nodded imperceptibly, then spoke. "Then we go public. Tomorrow's G7 briefing will outline the proposal. Your response?" Zelensky's feed showed him slamming the folder shut. "My response, a press conference at noon. The world hears how Berlin's peace masks a pullback, 8 billion pledged, but only 4 delivered on time. If you push this, Chancellor, you ignite the firestorm yourself." The call ended with a sharp beep. Scholz stared at the blank screen, the room's air thicker now. He turned to his advisor. "Draft the statement, but monitor Zelensky's channels. Something's brewing." 2 days later, in Kyiv's presidential offices, Zelensky paced the carpeted corridor outside his briefing room. Aides hovered, phones buzzing with incoming wires from Brussels. The peace plan's text, leaked selectively overnight, had hit European headlines framing Germany as the reluctant savior. He entered the room where his foreign minister waited, a stack of printouts in hand. "President, the numbers don't lie. Scholz's plan reallocates 12 billion from frozen Russian assets, but ties 70% to ceasefires we can't enforce without troops. It's a trap." Zelensky stopped at the window overlooking the Dnieper's gray flow. "A trap we expose. Call the press. No more closed doors." By midday, the conference hall filled with journalists, cameras flashing like distant artillery. Zelensky stepped to the podium, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Chancellor Scholz's proposal isn't peace, it's pressure. Ukraine has lost 30% of its energy infrastructure to strikes, yet Germany demands we yield land for vague aid. We reject it outright." Murmurs swelled. A reporter shouted from the back, "Does this mean severed ties with Berlin?" Zelensky's gaze hardened. Ties? Only if they force our hand. The fallout starts now. In Berlin that evening, Scholz watched the broadcast from his office, the city lights blurring through rain-streaked glass. His phone vibrated, a secure line from the BND. Chancellor, we've intercepted shatters. Zelensky's team has documents on our Minsk follow-ups. If they release them... Scholz set the phone down slowly. The plan's first crack had appeared, and with it, a shadow over the alliance. A week passed, tensions simmering as diplomats traded barbs in unlit corridors. In a Brussels side room during an EU summit, Scholz met Zelensky's envoy face-to-face for the first time since the call. The air smelled of fresh varnish from recent renovations, chairs creaking under their weight. The envoy, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, slid a dossier across the table. These figures from your foreign office, 2.5 billion euros in undeclared logistics support to Poland's border, rerouted from Ukraine's share. Explain. Scholz scanned the pages, his pulse quickening. Forged? No. Too precise. Internal memos on delayed Leopard tank deliveries, citing budget shortfalls of 15%. This is selective. Our commitments stand at 90% fulfillment. She leaned forward. Selective? Like your plan's fine print. Concessions that hand Russia 40% of our grain exports routes? President. Zelensky demands transparency, or we go to the UN. Scholz's hand tightened on the dossier. A knock interrupted, his chief of staff, face pale. Chancellor, Zelensky's just announced bilateral talks with Paris. They're offering $5 billion untied. The envoy smiled thinly. Scholz felt the ground shift ebate. Then the firestorm spreads. Back in Kyiv, Zelensky reviewed satellite maps in the war room, red lines marking contested fronts. His defense chief pointed to a cluster near Zaporizhia. Russian build-up, 5,000 more vehicles. If Scholz's plan leaks further, it emboldens them. Zelensky nodded, then turned to his press secretary. Prepare the archive release, those German cables from last year, hinting at energy deals with Gazprom. But hold the worst, let them sweat. The room emptied, leaving him alone with the maps. A secure email pinged, coordinates for a shadow meeting proposed by an anonymous NATO contact. Trust it, or walk into the lurking threat? In Berlin, 2 weeks after the initial clash, Scholz convened his inner circle in the chancellery basement, fluorescent strips buzzing overhead, folders stamped classified piled high, coffee cups half empty. Zelensky's maneuvers have cost us. Public support dipped to 55% on Ukraine aid, his finance minister said, flipping charts. The peace plan's exposed clauses could trigger a 20 billion euro backlash in the Bundestag. Scholz rubbed his temple. We counter with facts. Release our aid logs, 1.2 million tons of munitions shipped, but quietly probe their leaks. Who's feeding them? A junior aide cleared his throat. Sir, intercepted call logs show French involvement. Macron's office coordinating with Kyiv on a rival initiative. 10 billion in loans, no strings. Scholz stood abruptly, chair scraping tile. The betrayal stung deeper than expected. Kaubalati inside der and seeing so what pre dender den by tree and stouderliner and Serbagida versus Zelensky that's near Tebrai and we on voice. The call connected that night, voices echoing in the dim-lit op center. Zelensky's tone was ice. Chancellor, your diversions weaken us all. Paris offers real partnership. Why fight it? Because it's chaos, Scholz replied. Your rejections invite Russian opportunism. Border incidents up 30% this month. Sign the plan or watch the alliance fracture. Zelensky paused, the line crackling. Fracture. You've already cracked it with secrets, but if you want demands met, reveal your backroom sums first. The connection held, taut as wire. Then from Zelensky's end, a muffled voice. President, the documents are verified. German talks with Putin dated yesterday. Scholz froze. The lurking threat had a name, and it was closing in. The rain-slicked streets of Brussels gleamed under sodium lamps as the EU foreign minister's convoy pulled up to the Europa building. Inside, the council chamber's high ceilings amplified every footfall, the scent of polished marble hanging in the air. Olaf Scholz entered first, his coat dripping onto the floor, followed by his counterpart. From France, who carried a slim leather briefcase. Across the table, Ukraine's foreign minister sat rigid, flanked by aides scribbling notes. The agenda item blinked on screens. Ukraine Peace Framework. German proposal review. Scholz cleared his throat, unfolding a single sheet. Gentlemen, the fallout from Kyiv's rejection has rippled. Zelensky's press salvo cost us leverage. French polls now show 48% favoring bilateral aid over our joint plan. The French minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian, tapped his pen once. Leverage? Your plan's concessions, yielding eastern access routes, invited that backlash. We've pledged $3 billion in direct loans to Kyiv, untied. If Berlin pushes partition, Paris walks. Ukraine's minister leaned forward, his voice measured. Walk? You've seen the cables we hold. German diplomats in Moscow last month discussing energy swaps, 15 billion cubic meters of gas rerouted through Nord Stream remnants in exchange for quiet on troop pullbacks. That's the hidden scheme President Zelensky warned of. Scholz's eyes flicked to the page, then back. He set it down deliberately. Rumors, not cables. Our demands remain. De-escalation zones along 400 kilometers of front, monitored by OSCE. Reject them, and EU cohesion cracks. We've already delayed $2 billion in the next tranche. Le Drian opened his briefcase, sliding photos across. Grainy images of a Berlin hope old Blau Bidiao Feiches figures, blurred but recognizable. Not rumors. Our services confirm it. If this leaks wider, the firestorm engulfs all of us. Zelensky demands your full disclosure first. The chamber doors swung open then, admitting a late arrival from the commission. Whispers followed. Scholz felt the shift, the room's balance tipping. Disclosure? Fine, but only if Kyiv reciprocates on their Paris talks. No side deals. Ukraine's minister gathered the photos. Reciprocate? Your proposal ignores our losses. Over 100,000 square kilometers occupied. We expose what we must to protect sovereignty. 3 days later, in a Kyiv safe house on the city's outskirts, Zelensky met his intelligence chief under the hum of a white noise generator. The room's walls, lined with soundproof foam, closed in like a vault. Maps pinned to one side showed shifting front lines, red pins marking Russian advances. The chief spread a folder. President, the Brussels meeting yielded fractures. Scholz conceded on the gas talks but tied it to our silence. France pushes for a summit. Macron wants you there, offering observer status in their energy pact. Zelensky traced a line on the map. Silence buys nothing. Release the redacted cables tomorrow, enough to pressure Berlin without burning bridges. Show the EU the lurking threat. Russia's 50,000 fresh conscripts massing near the border. The chief nodded, sealing the folder. Outside, a car engine growled to life. And the personal angle? Our source says Scholz's advisor met a Kremlin envoy in Vienna last week. Names, dates, it's solid. Zelensky paused at the window, curtains drawn against the night. Use it sparingly. We escalate, but controlled. By week's end, the leak hit wires from anonymous EU channels. Headlines screaming, Berlin's secret gas gambit in Ukraine talks. In the Bundestag's press gallery, reporters clamored as Scholz's spokesman deflected. Misrepresentations. Our focus remains the plan's core, aid for stability. But in private, Scholz paced his office, phone to ear. Find the source. This changes everything. Zelensky's playing our game now. The call ended. He sank into his chair, staring at a secure fax incoming. Coordinates for an urgent trilateral. Germany, Ukraine, France. Yet the attached note chilled. Kremlin aware. Demands meeting or exposes all. A month into the standoff, with autumn fog blanketing the Rhine, Scholz hosted a discreet dinner in a Bonn chateau for select envoys. Crystal glasses clinked softly, the fire crackling in the hearth. Zelensky's representative arrived last, coat shedding droplets. Chancellor, the cables were just the start, the envoy said, accepting a seat. Your Vienna contact? He offered Moscow veto power on our NATO path. In writing. If that's not a threat, what is? Scholz swirled his wine, the liquid dark as ink. Exaggerated. We sought dialogue to avert escalation. Russian strikes up 25% since your rejection. The plan saves lives. Phased aid, 10 billion phased over 2 years. The envoy set down his glass. Saves? It cedes leverage. France backs us now. Joint statement tomorrow, calling your proposal unbalanced. The demands evolve, full transparency, or we pivot to Washington. Scholz's fork paused mid-air. A server entered, plates steaming. Pivot? That invites chaos. Zelensky knows the stakes. Isolated, Ukraine folds. The envoy smiled faintly. Folds or fight smarter? Your hidden schemes surface. Ours stay buried. As the meal progressed, aides slipped notes. Public outrage building, protests in Berlin numbering in the thousands. Scholz excused himself to the veranda, fog swirling. His phone buzzed. Zelensky direct. Chancellor, the firestorm you sparked now burns your house. Meet in person or watch the alliance unravel. Scholz gripped the rail. The demand hung unanswered. But from the shadows of the garden, a figure watched. Scholz's own chief of staff, phone in hand, whispering to an unknown line. The betrayal whispered closer. The frost clung to the windows of the Geneva Conference Center, etching patterns like fractured alliances. Inside the side chamber, away from the main hall's bustle, Volodymyr Zelensky's chief advisor laid out a series of binders on the glass-topped table. The air carried a faint trace of citrus from the adjacent citrus grove outside, a sharp contrast to the tension within. Olaf Scholz's envoy, a seasoned diplomat with lines etched deep around his eyes, arrived precisely on time, his footsteps muffled on the carpet. He nodded curtly, taking a seat opposite. The leaks have forced our hand. President Zelensky's cables painted a damning picture, those Moscow talks on gas rerouting. But they're incomplete, we reveal our side now. The advisor flipped open the first binder, pages whispering against each other. Incomplete? Try selective. Your documents show 12 billion euros in potential EU funds earmarked for reconstruction, but 40% diverted to neutral zone buffers that favor Russian logistics. Schemes like this, hidden in appendices, have already cost Ukraine 8% of its Black Sea exports this quarter. Scholz's envoy scanned the highlighted sections, his finger tracing a clause. He exhaled through his nose. Diversions for security. The plan's core holds. Ceasefires along key fronts monitored by 500 mitres. Hadirbachi has 500 international observers. Without it, escalation looms. Russian drone strikes up 15% in the past month alone. The advisor pushed forward a second set. Intercepted transcripts from Berlin's Foreign Office. Security? These logs detail back-channel overtures to Putin, promises of eased sanctions on energy imports if Ukraine concedes Donetsk access. Victims mount, 20,000 displaced from those very zones last fall. Society reacts. Protests in Warsaw, editorials in Paris calling your proposal a sellout. Scholz's envoy leaned back, the chair creaking under him. A server entered with water glasses, the clink breaking the silence. Reactions? The elite fracture, too. France's Macron has rallied 10 southern EU states against us, demanding veto rights on any concessions. But reveal this. Our intelligence on Kyiv's arms deals with Turkey. 2 billion in drones, undeclared to NATO. The advisor's eyes narrowed. He gathered the binders slowly. Undeclared? Like your Vienna envoy's notes, trading neutrality for grain corridor guarantees? The firestorm spreads. Leaks hit Brussels wires this morning. Zelensky goes public at noon. 2 weeks later, in Kyiv's fortified briefing room, Zelensky stood before a wall of screens displaying live feeds from European capitals. The space hummed with the soft whir of servers' cables snaking across the floor like veins. His foreign minister entered, tablet in hand, face flushed from the cold outside. President, the revelations landed hard. Berlin's stock dipped 3% on energy fears. Opposition in the Bundestag demands Scholz's audit. But new interests emerge. Washington's envoy signals interest, hinting at a $5 billion bridge loan if we align against the German plan. Zelensky turned from the screens where Paris crowds chanted for solidarity. A line? We expose more. Those Turkish deals were survival. Your documents confirmed German delays on our Patriot systems, stalling by 6 months, losses, 500 civilian sites hit in that window. The minister nodded, swiping through files. Society stirs. Polls in Berlin show 52% now view the plan as biased. Secondary players circle. Poland's Duda offers joint border patrols, 3,000 troops committed. But the elite react. Scholz's coalition wobbles, whispers of a no-confidence push. Zelensky paced to the map table, pins marking shifting pressures. An aide burst in, breathless. "Sir, French intelligence shares Scholz's team met U.S. counterparts covertly. They're revising the plan. Concessions softened, but still tying aid to our eastern pullback." Zelensky stopped, hand on the table edge. "Softened? It's a feint. Prep the dossier for Geneva follow-up. We demand full council review. No more shadows." By month's end, the EU Foreign Affairs Council convened in a Strasbourg hall lined with tapestries, the air thick with the murmur of translators. Scholz arrived via secure shuttle, his advisor at his side clutching a revised proposal. Zelensky's representative waited at the podium, a stack of printed revelations beside him. "Chancellor's plan unravels," the representative began, voice steady. "Facts laid bare. 15 billion in frozen assets, half pledged to us, but funneled through German banks to Moscow intermediaries. Victims, families in Kherson, infrastructure crumbled, 25 bridges down since talks began." Scholz's advisor interjected from the floor, rising sharply. "Bear, your selective drops ignore context. We reveal the full ledger. Ukraine's unreported 1.5 billion in parallel funding from Gulf states, risking NATO ties. The schemes cut both ways." Murmurs rippled through the delegates. The French foreign minister stood next. "Both ways? This divides us. New proposal from Paris and Warsaw. Untied 7 billion for Kyiv, no territorial strings. The elite demand unity, or the fallout consumes the bloc." Scholz watched from his seat, jaw set. A side door opened. An aide slipped him a note. "Kyiv source confirms. Zelensky has Polish border intel on our troop movements. Leak imminent." The representative closed his folder. "Unity? Only if Berlin yields the documents. Otherwise, the revelations continue." The gavel fell, adjourning the session. Scholz rose, the hall emptying around him. His phone vibrated, a direct line from Zelensky. "Chancellor, your secrets surface like ice in spring. But the real threat? Our allies now hold the proof of your deepest compromise with Washington." The winter chill seeped through the cracks of Warsaw's foreign ministry annex where frost etched the glass partitions. Volodymyr Zelensky's envoy, a compact man with a perpetual furrow in his brow, arrived under cover of early dusk, his boots leaving wet prints on the slate floor. Poland's foreign minister greeted him with a firm handshake, guiding him to an alcove table strewn with printouts and steaming mugs of barley tea. "The revelations from Strasbourg hit like a blizzard," the Polish minister said, sliding a tablet across. "Your cables exposed those German energy diversions. 5 billion euros in EU funds, siphoned to stabilize Berlin's grids while our borders strain. Society boils, farmers in Lviv block roads, demanding answers." Zelensky's envoy scrolled through the feeds, images of Kyiv rallies flickering. He set the device down. "Boils, it's erupting. New documents from our archives. Scholz's office approved 2,000 tons of fertilizer exports to Russia last quarter, masked as humanitarian. Losses pile, our harvest down 18%. If we release this, the elite fracture further." The minister poured more tea, steam curling upward. A clock ticked steadily on the wall. "Fracture? Our Duda rallies the Visegrad group. Hungary wavers, but Czechs commit 1 billion in border tech. Secondary players emerge. London's Starmer floats a Baltic defense pact, eyeing German concessions, but the schemes deepen. Your intel on U.S. whispers?" Zelensky's envoy nodded, pulling a encrypted drive from his coat. Washington's envoy met Scholz in Lisbon 2 weeks back. Transcripts show talks of a parallel aid track, $4 billion American dollars, but only if Ukraine caps frontline reinforcements at 50,000. Victims forgotten. Refugee camps overflow with 300,000 from the east. The Polish minister's eyes hardened. He stood pacing to the window overlooking the Vistula's dark flow. "Caps? That's the trap. We counter with our own proposal. Joint patrols along 200 kilometers, no strings. But if Berlin leaks our moves," a aide knocked, entering with a hurried step. "Minister, French wire. Macron convenes emergency summit. Zelensky's name tops the invite. Demands full German ledger." Zelensky's envoy pocketed the drive. "Ledger or lies, we push the release, tonight through neutral channels." 3 weeks on, in the shadowed briefing suite of the Élysée Palace, Emmanuel Macron hosted a tight circle under the glow of table lamps. The air hummed with the faint scent of polished leather from the armchairs. Zelensky joined via secure link from a mobile command post near the front, his face illuminated by a single overhead bulb, distant thuds echoing on the crime brain. President Zelensky, the documents you've surfaced rewrite the board, Macron said, gesturing to aides who projected spreadsheets on the wall. Scholz's diversions, $3 billion from the cohesion fund, redirected to domestic subsidies. Elite reaction, Berlin's Greens bolt the coalition, citing betrayal. New interests, our banks freeze German accounts tied to those exports. Zelensky's image sharpened as he adjusted his headset. Betrayal? It's calculated. Fresh facts from our signals. Your Paris talks with Berlin last month pledged $1.5 billion in loans, but conditional on our silence about the fertilizer route. Society stirs. Berlin streets fill with 50,000 marchers, chanting for transparency. Macron leaned into the camera, his voice low. Silence? We hedged for unity. But the sums shock. Ukraine's infrastructure losses at $40 billion since invasion, while Germany secures 20% cheaper gas imports. Secondary players pivot. Italy's Meloni offers mediation, but demands a slice of reconstruction contracts. An aide interrupted, handing Macron a folder. Zelensky watched, unblinking. Mediation or more schemes? We reveal the Lisbon logs tomorrow. U.S. pressure on Scholz to isolate us. If you join the chorus chancellor, the Firestorm engulfs NATO. Macron flipped the folder open, pages rustling. The room fell still, save for the link's soft static. Isolate? That's the risk we all face. France backs your play, but only if it unites, not divides. Zelensky cut the feed abruptly. In his outpost, aides gathered around a tactical board, markers shifting positions. Prep the packet for Warsaw and London. The elite react. Now we force their hand. By early spring, as thaws softened the ground along the Oder, Scholz faced a closed Bundestag committee in a vaulted chamber lined with oak panels. The air carried musty trace of old books from adjacent libraries. Opposition leaders circled, one brandishing a sheaf of leaked memos. "Chancellor, these revelations bury you," the lead inquisitor said, voice echoing off the walls. "Fertilizer to Moscow. 2,000 tons, timed with our aid shortfalls. Victims, farmers in Kharkiv, yields halved. Society demands audit. Polls show your support at 42%. Scholz sat unmoving, hands flat on the table. He met the gaze steadily. Demands? Context matters. Those exports stabilized food prices here, preventing 10% inflation spikes. The schemes you decry were bridges to de-escalation. A backbencher rose, slamming the table. "Bridges to betrayal! New facts from Kyiv. Your Lisbon nod to U.S. caps on our arms flows, delaying 500 HIMARS units. Elite fury. Mertz's faction threatens snap vote." Scholz's advisor whispered urgently from the side. The chamber doors creaked open. A messenger slipped in, note in hand. Scholz read it, face paling. Caps? Defensive measures. But if Zelensky floods the wires with more? The inquisitor pressed. More? Like the frozen assets. 15 billion half untraced to Russian oligarchs via German shells. The fallout reshapes everything. Scholz stood, the session breaking into chaos. Outside, protesters' chants filtered through. His phone buzzed, a Paris number. Macron. Olaf. The documents multiply. Zelensky's envoy arrives tomorrow with proof of your deepest cut. A secret pledge to Washington, trading our alliance for energy security. The spring rains battered the slate roofs of the Luxembourg Palace, where the EU's Foreign Affairs Council had convened in emergency session. Water streamed down the leaded windows, blurring the view of manicured gardens now sodden and gray. Olaf Scholz arrived soaked, his umbrella discarded in the vestibule, as aides rushed to towel his coat. Inside the ornate chamber, crystal chandeliers cast fractured light on the long table, where delegates from 27 nations shifted papers and murmured into ens obier peace, kommer nammer size, and C2 AOS. Emmanuel Macron presided, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the armrest. Volodymyr Zelensky's foreign minister stood at the podium, a digital tablet in hand, his suit crisp against the room's opulence. Chancellors, Lisbon pledged to Washington, trading alliance unity for 10 billion in LNG deals, seals the revelations. Schemes exposed 4 billion euros in frozen assets, rerouted through German shells to Russian proxies, while Ukraine's grids fail under strikes that claimed 2,000 lives this winter. Scholz met the minister's gaze from his seat, the wood cool under his palms. He leaned forward slightly. Exposed, selective truths, our concessions aimed at de-escalation, ceasefire lines holding for 150 kilometers, saving 5,000 troops from exposure. The firestorm you ignited now threatens the bloc. French banks report 20% withdrawal spikes from joint funds. Macron interjected, voice slicing the tension. Threatens? It's transformed. New interests align. Poland and the Baltics form a defense consortium pledging 3 billion untied to Kyiv. Society demands change. Berlin streets echo with calls for your resignation, Chancellor, as opposition surges to 55% in snap polls. The minister tapped the tablet, projecting ledgers onto the wall. Change? Overdue. Victims tally. 1 million displaced since talks stalled. Economies hemorrhage 30 billion across the east. Elite reactions fracture your coalition. Merz's faction bolts, citing the Vienna envoy's notes on NATO vetoes. Scholz's advisor slipped him a note. U.S. envoy en route demands full audit. He crumpled it slowly. Fracture, we counter with transparency. Release our full aid logs, 28 billion committed since 2022, 90% delivered. But Zelensky's leaks invite Russian probes, border incursions up 12% this month. A delegate from Warsaw rose, voice steady. Probes or opportunity? Our consortium bypasses Berlin, direct arms flows, no strings, the schemes end here. The chamber erupted in side conversations, translators struggling to keep pace. Macron called for order, his gavel sharp on oak. Ends? Not yet. President Zelensky joins remotely, his verdict shapes the path. Zelensky's feed flickered on the main screen, his backdrop a stark Kyiv office with maps pinned haphazardly. Path? You've paved it with concessions that weaken us all. Chancellor, your plan's fallout reshapes Europe. Aid realigned, alliances redrawn. But the lurking threat persists. Moscow watches, 40,000 conscripts poised. Scholz stood, the chair scraping like a verdict. Redrawn? At what cost? Reject unity, and the system crumbles. NATO cohesion at risk. Economies stall. Zelensky's eyes narrowed on screen. Crumbles? It rebuilds stronger. France? Poland? Your pacts commit 7 billion, sovereignty intact. Germany's role? Advisor, not arbiter. 2 months later, under a tentative summer sun filtering through the Reichstag's glass dome, Scholz addressed a subdued Bundestag Pepini Nein Masul, gewesen DC eter, and air hummed with the low buzz of ventilation, seats half empty as coalition partners averted eyes. Reporters crammed the galleries, notebooks poised. Colleagues, the diplomatic firestorm has exacted its toll. Scholz began, voice echoing off the vast space. Revelations forced reforms, independent audits on all EU funds, transparency clauses in every aid package. My government yields the peace lead to a rotating council. Berlin steps back, but supports. Murmurs swelled. The opposition leader interjected from the floor. Yields, resigns. Your schemes cost us leverage. Ukraine's new pacts with Paris and Warsaw secured 12 billion, bypassing us. Personal toll. Your advisor arrested yesterday on leak charges. Vienna logs tracing to his desk. Scholz paused, hand on the podium. Aides flanked him, faces drawn. Toll acknowledged. I offer my resignation effective dawn, allowing fresh mandate. But the structure shifts. Europe's power decentralizes. No single voice dictates. Ukraine stands sovereign. Borders redrawn by consent, not concession. The chamber fell silent, then applause mixed with jeers. Outside, crowds gathered under blue skies, banners calling for accountability. Zelensky watched the broadcast from his Kyiv residence, a secure line open to Macron. Resignation? A start. But the country's sense evolves. Unity forged in exposure, not secrecy. Macron's reply came swift. Evolves to resilience. Our alliance endures. Reformed. Security guarantees locked. 20 billion pooled for eastern defenses. In the weeks that followed, as harvest fields yellowed across the continent, systemic changes took root. EU protocols mandated quarterly disclosures on all bilateral deals, curbing backroom trades. Resignations rippled. Scholz's finance minister followed suit, citing irreparable trust gaps. New rules emerged. A Ukraine recovery board, co-chaired by Kyiv and Brussels, BC, funneling 15 billion without intermediaries. Zelensky toured the Donbass front, now stabilized under joint patrols, his motorcade kicking up dust on repaired roads. Personal outcomes varied. Broken figures like Scholz retreated to advisory roles, while Macron rose as mediator, his stature bolstered by the pivot. Others disappeared into obscurity, their schemes footnotes in reform manifestos. The power structure transformed, no longer Berlin's shadow over the east, but a web of equals, vigilant against lurking threats. Ukraine, scarred yet unbowed, redefined its place. Not pawn, but architect. The Firestorm's embers cooled, leaving a Europe remade, warier, woven tighter, its sense of self forged in the crucible of fallout.